We're so very aware of the very busy time everyone is living through at the moment, but it's at that point of the year when the end is in sight. So I hope this opportunity to lift your head will keep you going as we look with Avis at the enduring nature of leadership together. I had asked Avis if she could send us a link to a paper for you to read in advance of the session, but as you will have seen, Avis has so generously compiled an incredible handout as a resource for you. So I hope you're able to have that open, as she will refer to it throughout the session. And I know that Avis is looking forward to you joining in and contributing to the conversation. Avis, of course, has a truly stunning biography, as you will see from our events site, that speaks of the accomplishments of this outstanding educator. But I'd like to tell you briefly about the first time I met Avis, which speaks more to the character of our inspirational guest than her work. In 2013, Avis was one of the keynote speakers at the Scottish Learning Festival, beside Andy Hargreaves and Pazzi Salberg. Avis was there to argue the case for the excellence and equality as an imperative for school systems today. For her, education is the ultimate tool of empowerment and high levels of student outcomes, which are the true measures of equity. So that year in Perth and Kinross, where I was the head teacher, there was an arrangement for head teachers to gather in one of our secondary schools to participate in a live link to allow us all to hear her keynote. You can imagine the excitement in the community school of Oughterarder that afternoon. However, I'm sure you could almost feel the disappointment when it couldn't be made to work. And of course, Avis decided she was having none of that. So at the end of her day and her keynote in Glasgow at the Scottish Learning Festival, she got in a taxi and came to Oughterarder to do her session again with us, where I'm sure, despite being pretty tired, she took time to have a really rich discussion with us. It was an amazing act of consideration and kindness. She discussed an intentional approach to closing achievement gaps that would allow educators to deliver on the promise of educating successfully within the context of diversity. Her belief is that ensuring all students achieve at higher levels must be our shared purpose, and she sees failure should no longer be an option, given that we know it takes time to educate all children successfully, regardless of their background. So it's my incredible pleasure and delight to read a quick quote from Avis's new book to you, because I think, again, this is something that's really important for us all as leaders. It doesn't take long to learn that it's important to be tough and resilient and to develop a thick skin. But that toughness in leadership should not be of the muscle flexing kind. It has to be a principled toughness based on core values. And we know from all of Avis's work that she's all about our core values and how that instills love and care into the culture of our schools. So without saying any more, I'm going to hand you over to Avis Glaze for the next hour. Thank you, Avis.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that warm welcome and for reminding me of that quote. In fact, only last night I was thinking about, toughness must be principled. It's interesting that you focused on that one. Thank you very much, Annette. And thanks to Leslie and Laura as well for being here to make sure that everything goes well and for the organization. You can well imagine how delighted I am to welcome you. Whenever I speak of Scotland, you need to know I am sort of filled with emotions because it's absolutely one of my favorite, in fact, my favorite country. And it's my favorite country because of all the experiences I've had there. You know, many of you may not know I was the first to receive the special award for character development, the Robert Owen Award, many years ago. And that was a very emotional moment for me as well. But it's based on the experiences I've had in the hotels, in the restaurants, when I meet young people. I could write a book about my experiences with the young people. And the reason I'm mentioning it, because they are your graduates. It means that you are doing something well in your schools. I'll give you one quick example. A few years ago, I broke my ankle, and then in a short while, I'd gone at an appointment in Scotland, so I went. And of course, I was still trying to hobble around. I went into a department store. Can you imagine? I'm shopping even though I have a broken ankle. But when I got to this department store, I stood at the door and I was a bit exhausted. A young woman, about 18 years old, rushed up to me. She said, "You seem to be so tired. Why don't you just wait right here and I'll find your chair?" And she went all around the store to find me a chair to sit on. I'm telling you that because that's one of your graduates. And I want to thank you for the outstanding work that you have been doing. And that is what makes your country such a great place. What's great for me is that the young people are demonstrating to me in the restaurants. I could give you so many examples. They have taken on the wonderful values and qualities that you have shared with us. So your country will be able to replicate these wonderful values as time progresses. All I can say right now is thank you very much for the work that you have been doing. Now, there are going to be many challenges for us. And only yesterday I was reading again, OECD and other places are asking us if we're ready for the next pandemic. Can you imagine? You haven't fully dealt with this one, although you're doing such a great job, but they're warning us that there'll be another pandemic, and it's going to be probably around the mental health and other areas. But what OECD has also said, and what I want to mention to you, is that so many of you have been working to locate, to reintegrate, to remotivate the many students that have been lost as a result of this pandemic. And OECD is concerned that across the world there'll be 12 million. In Canada, they say probably 200,000 that we would have lost. It's going to be up to us to track and trace those young people and to make sure that they get an education. So once again, thank you. I started off my presentation by writing a long letter to you, and I'm sure you have read that already. In this, I talked about the exploding expectations that are placed on you and encourage you to take care of your own well-being and that of your colleagues. You must first put the mask on your own face. They will tell us on the airplane, and then and only then will you be able to help others. So with all that you're going through, these are challenging times, no doubt, but as Warren Bennett said, good leaders are not deterred by hard times. That is what makes them good leaders. I also said in the letter that you should take time to make sure that you educate both hearts as well as mind. For so long, and that's why my book, Reaching the Heart of Leadership, we have focused so much on what the literature refers to as the hard skills. And I think, especially in today's times, ladies and gentlemen, people who can lead from the heart, who can lead with emotion, who can lead with empathy, are the ones who are going to be truly appreciated, because people want to know you care. And we must have that ability as leaders to demonstrate that caring for them. So now we live in the land of affect. Affective education is going to be the education of the day, where we're going to demonstrate our own kindness, our resilience, and all of those wonderful qualities like empathy, which must be important. That's why when we have the title Enduring Leadership, I can tell you I have a husband who challenges me so much. Peter is from Exeter in England. That's his background. But when he saw me working on this, he says, enduring leadership. He said, did you know that enduring can have so many meanings? You're just enduring this job. And I said, no, that's not what we meant at all. Enduring for us, and that means lasting leadership. And that's why I added the riding the waves of change to show that this is something positive and that your leadership is not something that you are enduring. You're good leaders because you want to be good leaders and you want to embed your own values and what you're doing into the fabric of your organizations so that even when you leave, they will still be a part of the culture of that organization. Now, as you notice, I've started off by giving a sort of historical perspective on leadership. And I wanted just to highlight how leadership has changed just by giving some of those definitions. From the 1967 definition where they talk about leaders directing and controlling, 1967, to today's date when you're talking about empowering, motivating a more humanistic approach to leadership. That's why I think we must reach the heart of leadership. It doesn't mean that we cannot be tough, as Annette pointed out, but our toughness must be principled and must be based on some core values. So that quick definition of leadership. I hope that you're taking note of these different recommended actions, because I'm going to give you an opportunity from time to time to speak on any of those actions that you consider important, and also to give us examples from your own setting of things you have done. Recommended action number 2, I'll go through very quickly because I want you to have to speak. I want to highlight ensuring high expectations. Let me highlight Pullen's work. I remember a few years ago, I talked to Michael, which I do quite often, and I asked him about what does he feel about leadership today. And he, a few years ago, he said we should achieve 90 to 95% success. And of course, I challenged Michael. I said, who would be in those 10 or 15%? So he changed, and he said, number 1 on page 4, the new mission for schools is to achieve 100% success and to have specific explanations and strategies for addressing any figure that falls short of that. That's the challenge. And when I speak to many people, they say we can't have 100% success. I think Scottish head teachers must aim at that 100% success. No child must be left behind. So I hope you will challenge me, but I know what it's going to take for you to address the needs and what systems need to do to support you so that you address the needs of the intractable group, seemingly intractable group of people who are not achieving the success that you want. So that's a question. Are you able? Are you equipped? Are you supported so that you can have 100% success? The next recommended action is about motivation. And I've quoted old research on what motivates people. And I wanted you to look at what employers' responses were. They were asked to rank order what motivates people. They started off by dollars, job security, promotions. When employees were asked what motivates them, appreciation, feeling of belonging, sympathy for personal problems. In my book, I gave a few examples of my learning to be even more sensitive to the people on my staff and so on. I was so demanding to someone at one stage, and he asking them to do more and more and more extracurricular activities and be a part of the debating society. And he came to me that afternoon, an old man. He was the oldest man. I say old, I'm older than he is now, but he was the oldest on staff. And he says, Avis, you need to know my son has recently been arrested. My wife has cancer. Can you imagine? I started to cry because I realized my own insensitivity in trying to get things done. I was not being attuned to the feelings of my staff the way I should have. I learned a lesson from that. Okay, so next, I want you to look at recommendation number 4. I love this work because so often we've been talking a lot about equality and equity, but I came across this from OECD. They have added justice, and notice the depiction there. We used to think everybody gets the same supports. That was equality. In equity, everyone gets the support they need. You see those supports. But look at justice. And I want Scottish head teachers to be people who promote justice. What they're doing here, all 3 can now see the game without supports or accommodations. Why? Because the cause of the inequity was addressed. That for me was very instructive when that justice piece was added. Next, recommendation. Action number 5, include a curriculum that expands our current understanding of what literacy entails. And I would encourage you, if you haven't seen that book by Dustin Summey, a very young man, and I don't think he's in education either, but he talked about all those emergent literacies. I used to think I was a literacy specialist until I saw the other types of literacies that I had not even considered. Media literacy, well, of course we do. Social literacy, cultural literacy. Okay, next, number 6, provide the necessary supports to ensure your school is an effective school. Now, those ideas are mine. I'm sure you could add to that, because many of you are leading effective schools. If you see something missing, I hope you will share it with others. Number 7, developmentally based career development. You have no idea how passionate I am about career development and also about character development. But the whole issue of career development, besides all the things that students need to know to be able to link what they're learning in school with future occupations, let me say to you that I believe that career development is an equity issue. Middle class and upper class individuals, they have so many experiences. They go to on excursions with their parents. The exposure, the language, it's phenomenal. What about the working class kids? How are we? I believe it is the role of the school to expand the occupational choices of our young people so that it is no longer an equity issue. I'll give you one quick example. When I taught in a very poor school many years ago, I was a vice principal at the time, and you know, vice principals still tend to deal with a lot of discipline. I asked the secretary, please, at the end of every day, send me 3 or 4 of the students who are doing well, the A students, so that I can have a balance. So I started seeing a lot of young people who were doing extremely well. There was this little boy, 99, 100, mathematics, from a very poor neighborhood. I asked to see him. I said, let's talk once a week and explore occupations. He said, Miss, my father is in construction, and he says I can just take over the business from him, you know. In other words, don't bother me. I said, well, come anyway. Once a week, let's look at other possibilities. The second week he came, he said, well, Miss Glaze, I like my sciences, but I also like art. And any career we think about has to combine the two. I said, okay, let's search. I teach the job search skills. I'm not going to tell him what to do. We have to learn the search, because even when he's an adult, if he loses his job, he has to have job search skills. And ladies and gentlemen, the day when we came upon the occupation of medical illustrator, he said, Miss, let me read more about that, because I could combine my art with my sciences. Think of that. How many working class kids would learn about a medical illustrator if the school had not intervened? I remember going to the house of 2 professors for dinner. They had a 4-year-old. And I always ask young people, what would they like to do? Because I like to hear how sex-typed their choices are. This little girl said, I would like to be a paleontologist. 4 years old. Think of the background once again. So let me encourage you. You have a role as head teachers to make sure that our young people are exposed to a variety of occupations. Quickly, because I need time for you to talk. To building coalitions and engaging business, emphasizing character development, emphasizing ethical decision making. Number 10, ladies and gentlemen, when I am an old woman and I'm in a nursing home, especially if I'm living in Scotland, if I ask for a glass of water, I want one of your graduates to give it to me willingly and gladly. That will only happen if you help them with ethical decision making at a young age. And I've given you examples. Then I move into the whole issue of interpersonal skills, soft skills versus hard skills, expanding outreach and engagement. Number 14, implementation. I hope you will look at that carefully after this, because so many recommendations are on shelves, but we have not taken care of deep and sustained implementation so that what we're doing will take root and become a part of the culture. Then we have embedded and spread successful practices. One of the articles I gave you that I wrote was how Ontario spread successful practices. That's in the appendices. Next, a moment on that. I want you as leaders to prove these influential researchers wrong. Can you imagine Yan Zhao? The longer our students are in school, the less curious and the less creative they become. Next, high school students who exhibit creative personalities are more likely to drop out of school than other students. The one that I gasped at when I read it was Kevin Kumashara. I hope you read his work. He will challenge so many of your beliefs. Schools are complicit with oppression. Can you imagine that? Schools are complicit with oppression. I was almost angry when I read that. But when I read his article, I knew exactly what Kevin Kumashara was talking about. I hope you'll read that. The last one, number 4, on page 16. Statistically speaking, the best advice I would give to a poor child eager to get ahead through education is to choose richer parents. And the other one, of course, which should have been earlier, was the whole issue of Indigenous education. We have so much more to do in Canada on Indigenous education. In Canada, our Indigenous students are the fastest growing group in Canada, and they are at the bottom of every testing cycle that is done. We have to do more. I'm going to stop there for a moment, and if there's time later on, I will go through my personal reflections, but I want to give you an opportunity to speak. So I hope you will grab hold of any of those recommendations or mention some of your own and just share with your colleagues your own perspectives.
Gosh, Avis, that's some really amazing food for thought. I don't think I've been able to keep up writing down some of your comments. Career development is an equity issue. Discuss. What an amazing conversation out of that one sentence alone. And we've got Ali Allen coming in with a comment. Ali, would you like to open your mic?
Thanks, Annette. Avis, I couldn't keep up with you there. It was wonderful. That was such great messages. I'm really interested in your thoughts around the 100%. So if you had 3 key priorities for leaders to raise children's achievement and outcomes to 100%, what would they be?
Okay, good. Now, we know, Ali, from time immemorial that they say we have to vary time. It is true. You remember outcomes-based education. All children can learn and succeed, etc. But we have to vary time. They will succeed, but not on the same day and at the same rate. So what I started to do, Ali, was to disaggregate the data when I was in schools, to find out the students who are not doing well, and to vary time for them. We had Saturday school. We had after school. We had students from grade 12 tutoring the students in grade 1 and grade 2. We called an open outreach to community. Of course, we had to do what you call it, police checks and so on. You should see the number of grandparents who were teachers and who were coming in to help to tutor our students. Our libraries were packed with people who were tutoring those students who had fallen behind. So I really believe it can be done, but you have to have extra measures. And we cannot say, give us more money. There is no more money anywhere right now, but we have to use all the resources we have, the volunteers in our communities, because they want their schools to be good schools. So that's why I'm saying, Ali, 100%, but we have to put a really focused attention on the students who are lagging behind. What do you think of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree. I was actually in a school this morning, and one of the things we were discussing was the poverty-related attainment gap.
Yes.
And one of the members of staff, one of the teachers, spoke to me about what she had done.
Yes.
And what she had done was she had focused on food banks. She had focused on supporting families so that they were
That's
well and healthy, and allowing children to go on participate in outdoor education and to
Yes.
go over to Arran and have that opportunity. And the children would not have had the opportunity if she hadn't driven that initiative. So I'm totally in agreement with what you're saying, but that I think I would totally agree. Yeah.
And thank you for that question and reminding me too. I remember I went out to get people to donate food because many of our poor children were coming to school without meals. And you can well imagine what that meant. A hungry child, you're trying to teach a hungry child. So we had to get food. And if you tap into business, I'm amazed. Sometimes educators don't like business because they think that their intentions are wrong. But I learned to use the business community for the benefit of the school. And it's amazing how much they want to have an educated workforce. So they want to work with us as well. So thanks for your comments. Very well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, Annette, you're on mute.
Thanks, Leslie. Sorry about that. While we're waiting for other people to come into the conversation, there's a lovely section in your book that relates to what you've just been talking about on the entrepreneurial spirit and mindset. And I wondered if you would like to talk a little bit about that while people are typing things in the chat to come into the conversation.
Yes. Now, first of all, we used to think of entrepreneurs as greedy people who simply want to make money. But I remember reading, I think it was Yan Zhao's book, he opened my eyes because he says there are many different types of entrepreneurs. You know, there are those that you're accustomed to who are in business, but he said that there are social entrepreneurs. Can you imagine? And I thought educators are social entrepreneurs. We want to do creative things in order to change our situation. And of course, the people in government, there are many people in government who are organizational entrepreneurs as well. So entrepreneurship is not something that is only for business. We can be entrepreneurs by trying to do different things to find different solutions. In other words, I like the metaphor of the head teacher as solution finder. No longer do you want people to say, oh, I can't do this, I throw their heads up, you can't do enough. You need solution finders in education, but they realize they cannot do it alone. So they're going to coordinate and co-opt all the people in their communities to help them do well. I remember when I was a superintendent or director of education, we were getting a lot of immigrants, and some of the principals were very upset. Avis, I cannot just read enough to learn about these people, all the different groups. Every week there's a different religious group coming into my school. And I said, let me come out and talk with you about that. And I said, number one, let us now change the notion of learning about people and let's learn from them. Bring these different people into your school. They will help you. They will tell you what their values are. And I said, have a coalition of those new people. And it was amazing. He said, Avis, if I have a problem now, I can call this person, I can call this leader, because they're now a part of the culture. So let's move away from learning about people to learning from people.
Really interesting. Thank you, Avis. I think Jackie Gallagher had her hand up. Jackie, did you want to come in?
Yes, I will, although I actually clicked the link by mistake. But no, very happy to come in. I was really taken, on the first reading of the paper, and particularly, that section, it just happened to relate to something I'm working on just now, about learning and earning and employability skills, and
Yes.
that huge equity issue that lies behind that. So
Yes.
it's not that poverty is not necessary, is not always about not having things. It's about access to opportunities.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Jackie. Say a bit more, because I think you have hit the nail on the head. Say a bit more about and what you're doing or what you need to do more of. Tell us more, Jackie.
Well, I work with Education Scotland, so but going on inspections, for example, that I've been on, when you see people and they're linking it together, so they understand that the developing young workforce is not something that sits on its own away from poverty, the poverty-related attainment gap, but it's a major driver of bringing things together. And I think that's what you see when you look at the disparate parts. You need to join them up, and when you join them up, then you get something really powerful. But you cannot get it without that moral commitment that you were talking about.
Absolutely. Jackie, thank you so much for your comments. I remember doing a presentation in the US and years ago, and of course one of the principals, he really challenged me, and I thought he thought, oh, he's just going to put this little woman to shame. And he said something about, here you are talking about educating all children to a high level. He said, Avis, tell me, who is going to do the menial task if I educate all children successfully? That came from a principal. Who is going to do the menial task? So I said, what about your children doing some of those menial tasks? Of course, he said nothing more. But the issue is that, as I said, career development is an equity issue, and we must make sure that the exposure that our young people from especially those living in poverty have, mentorship programs, getting them into business organizations, finding out, first of all, their aptitudes, their interests, but those interests can be expanded, because the interests are as narrow as your exposure is. So if you want to expose those students to other occupations, then you have to make sure that you bring into the school the people who is going to help them. And make sure, years ago, when I was quite young as a teacher, I thought, oh, there was a lot being written about old women living in poverty. And I thought to myself, what if I were to bring some bag ladies into the school? Then that may teach the students a lesson. It didn't go well at all. I went back to reading, and I remember reading an article by Bandura, and he says, if you want students to identify with role models, those models have to have all the positive characteristics. Young, beautiful. So I brought in this young engineer who was so pretty, and the kids all ate it up. I learned a lot about modeling. They don't want to be people who are not successful, who are not pretty, who are not whatever, but bring them role models that they can feel, I want to be like him or her.
Thanks, Avis. That's really a really powerful message. I'm going to go back to your book again.
Yes.
Because I think all the way through the book, it aligns so well with what we're talking about today. And I wanted to ask you a wee bit more about advocacy, because I have used a clip of you speaking with the Ontario Principals Council in one of my programs about being school leaders as advocates for children and their communities. And I think it's a really important area that we look on. And I know that you had a paper back in 2012 about the 12 key attributes of advocates. And I wondered if you would like to talk a wee bit about how we as leaders in education can be advocates successfully.
Thank you very much. Oh, you have really read that book. Well, first of all, I say advocacy is not easy. You're going to be shut down sometimes, but you have to have a very tough skin. And you have to really believe in what you're advocating for. But I really believe that when one takes on a leadership role, what you're saying is that I cannot be faint of heart. I must be courageous if I'm really going to be somebody who is going to look out for the best interests of the people I chose to serve. So being a head teacher is synonymous with being an advocate. And as I said, it won't always be positive. You'll get into trouble. Some people don't want to hear advocates because very often you want to change institutional practice. But I think a head teacher who is not an advocate is not going to get done what he or she needs to do for the communities, because organizations are intransigent very often. They don't like to change. It takes too much to change rules and commonly held beliefs. I knew that. I mean, when I worked in government, I'm sure I was in everybody's bad books at times, because I would call out injustice. I would call out practices that were not in the best interest of what we are preaching. So being an advocate means aligning what we say with what we do, and being prepared to point out to people in a nice way. Because if you challenge them publicly and they become defensive, nobody wins. One of the things I learned when I was a very young girl was affirmative sort of ways of making change, how to be truly strategic so that you do not alienate people. I learned the language of assertiveness. So yeah, I was trying to grasp assertiveness training. The language of assertiveness. I remember as a teacher confronting, I'm using that word confronting because to me confront means to invite somebody to see what their actions are doing to others. When I was a young teacher, I confronted one of my directors of education at the time, but I learned the language. I said, Mr. So-and-so, I feel so disappointed when, and then you state the action. When you use the right language, 9 out of 10 times people would apologize because it's not their intention. So if you want to be an advocate, you have to learn what assertiveness training is all about so that you don't spend your time alienating everybody and getting nothing done.
I think that's so true. It's that art of careful listening, isn't it?
Absolutely.
To allow the development of empathy.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Core focus there also, I think, on building relationships and engagement. And in the papers you sent through, there's quite a lot in there about engagement, empowerment, and the relationship to content in the curriculum. I just wonder if you wanted to say a little bit more about that, Avis.
Okay, about engagement. And by outreach and engagement, there are many people who have had negative experiences in schools. They don't like schools. It means reaching out to them and bringing them in. I used to have parent conferences. I remember when I was a young administrator. The first conference I had about 60 people out of a school of 1,200. And then I thought, no, that's not good enough. I called a group of parents and I said, I missed you. Tell me what happened, why I had only 60 people. They said, number one, you haven't thought of transportation. Many of us who are poor, we don't have a car to drive. And this was more an area where people had long distances. You have to think of transportation. You have to think of babysitting. We don't have money to pay for babysitting. So I had a committee together and we dealt with the transportation. I went to the school bus deliverers, and I am the type, they used to say, Avis gets everything for free. I said to the school bus, look how much money you make on busing. You can give us X number of buses to pick people up at different places. They said yes. I went to the people who did her food in the cafeteria. I said, you have to provide free lunch that day. Our conference, the second one was about 600, and then it just went on and on and on. By listening to people, letting them be a part of the planning, letting the parents tell us what workshops they wanted. Some of them wanted how to help my child with mathematics, because they said, this is not the math I learned in school. By listening to them, by addressing their needs, by providing babysitting. For the babysitting. In Ontario, I was part of a commission many years ago that made mandatory volunteer hours, 40 hours each in the upper grades, as a part of the diploma requirements. People were so upset. This is 1996 that we had this. The first study that was done, they were not doing 40 hours of volunteer work. They were doing on an average 100. It's amazing how the young people, once they got into it, and the volunteer work also became career development. They were in hospitals, they were in other places. So what happened in that case was bringing people in, bringing the community in, and letting them be a part of the solution.
Thanks, Avis. Really great example there. Thank you for that. And Robert Gill in the chat has made a point there about he's interested in the difference between those who talk values and those who actually live them and explore them. Robert, did you want to come in and say a bit more about that?
Yeah, hiya. Thank you, Avis. Thank you for inviting us all. Can you hear me all right? Yeah.
Yes.
Great stuff. Yeah, I'm really interested because on the one hand, values has become quite a fashionable phrase to use, and people trot out this and talk about it, but I think it's a major opportunity to actually start living them and reflecting on them, and living by example of your values, because that shows you a real authenticity. And I just want your thoughts on how you go from, it's quite fashionable to talk values, but what does that going to look like in reality, and how's that going to challenge me and the schools and local authority that I'm part of and community?
Robert, thank you very much. I couldn't agree more with what you have just said. You know the statement, your actions speak so loudly, I can hardly hear what you're saying. And especially for students, I'm delighted you use the word authenticity. They can see through those lack of values so easily. So talking alone means nothing. Demonstrating the values, I think, are what it was important. When I was a young leader, I started character development in our schools, and it's a long process. I think one of the articles I gave you talk about the process I use for character development. I remember one day after we had chosen the character attributes, respect, responsibility, one night I woke up in the middle of the night and I was almost in a panic. I thought, oh my goodness, what if I'm preaching these values and people say, oh, well, Avis, you're talking about respect and you do this. I was concerned about what you're saying, Robert, that people were going to say, here you are, not practicing what you preach. So that day, I remember I called a meeting of all the staff and I said, this is a very challenging thing that we're trying here. I want you to come to my office. If ever you see me behaving in a way that is not consistent with the values, don't call me out, because everybody's defensive when they're called out in a crowd. Come to my office and say, Avis, you say this, but you're doing that. And I said, it will be a learning experience for me. So what I did was to say, I am a learner like all of you. I want you to help me live my values so that I can truly be authentic. So thank you very much for mentioning that, Robert. But I said to them, you have to help me because we're so inconsistent. It takes years for us to dislodge some of those behaviors that we've become accustomed to. And I can only do this as a leader if you are helping me with it. And they did. And I remember a group of secretaries came and said, last night at the board meeting, this recommendation was passed, Avis. How do you align that with what you're saying about treating employees well? They took me to task on those things, but it helped all of us to grow even more. So thank you, Robert, for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Avis. One of the things that we would maybe like to talk a little bit about is recommendation number 13.
Yeah.
Because recommendation number 13 sort of moves on from what Robert was talking about and values and sharing those out. And number 13 is expanding public outreach and engagement. And I think the example you gave of feeding people and looking after children and providing creches are all ways that are so intrinsic to the way we engage parents and families, but maybe a little bit about strong alliances with the wider community would be something to talk about a little.
Very good. Thank you very much. And one of the ways we did this was to have a certain number of conferences where we made them open to everyone and really brought the community in. Let me also say how important it was to engage the unions, because very often unions and organizations sometimes have very poor relationships. I remember when I was in charge of education in Ontario, I had a special outreach to the unions. And I'll give you one quick example. I had my personal budget, and I gave 5 million of that budget to the unions. I called them all in and I said, I'm going to give each of you a different task, the elementary union, the secondary union. The elementary union, I said, I want you to help me address poverty. Can you imagine how upset some people were when they said Avis gave $5 million of her budget many years ago to the union? But I said, come back to me in a week with your plan, number one, to address poverty. The elementary union decided that they would have a special play commission to bring the arts in, and they would go to all the schools. The play was called Danny, King of the Basement. I hope many of you will go to the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario, ETFO, and Google Danny, King of the Basement and see how the ramifications of that. But anyway, they had a play commissioned about poverty and lesson plans and everything, and they took it around to the schools, etc., etc. But let me fast forward. I retire, and a principal said, Avis, come to my school and do a little audit for me and tell me what we're doing well, what we're not doing well. So I said, as long as I can have some focus groups, I will do that. I said, I want a focus group with children, older kids and younger kids. Here am I with a focus group of 7, 8-year-olds. And I said, what did you learn in school this year that you really liked? A little boy, me, miss. I said, tell us what you learned. He said, Miss, there was a play called Danny, King of the Basement. I said, what did that teach you? It taught us about poverty and how and he went on and on about the play, Danny, King of the Basement. Ladies and gentlemen, I was almost in tears. Here was something that was started at the provincial level that had percolated through to the classroom so that the student was telling me the impact. That happened because I decided to trust the unions to work with me. Thank you.
You're on mute, Annette. Sorry, I was just going to pick up on one of the other aspects you talked about there, Avis, which was about research-informed practices. And I just wonder if you want to say a little bit more about that, just in connection with, I suppose more broadly, some of the aspects about leadership and the importance of leadership and extending some of the work beyond certain levels in the system.
I sort of missed some of the words that you said. Say that question again for me, please, because I missed some of the words.
Yeah, so it was about the evidence-informed practices. So I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about that, about the importance of that and ensuring that that is something that is embedded in the system. I think maybe just extending the point there you made there about that example.
That's right. And the point too is about, I've given you some research on what happens when we work with parents, for example, and what that means, and the impact that have had. A lot of clear research. The other research I gave you was a group of parents in the US who decided to come up with their own statements. Can you imagine how powerful that is? The I will statements, and they were holding one another to those statements about how they will support the school system. It means the faculties of education, the colleges, the universities, all of these people have a vested interest in education, and it's for us to tap into them. I'm sure you have seen some of our What Works monographs, because they're used all over the world. I started that when I was in my position because, again, I wanted the partnerships with the universities. I thought, here are university professors steeped in research. Why don't I get the teachers to ask research questions and get the university professors to write these monographs? Can you imagine the commitment they had to education? A teacher may say, how do I teach a certain type of learning? How do I do this? A university professor working in that area would write that monograph in a special way. Now, you can access those monographs. Have you seen those, Annette? You can access those monographs.
They're on the Ministry of Ontario site.
Exactly, and download these. But that was another partnership by reaching out to people who care deeply about education, who are steeped in research, and who would help us with the research questions that our teachers were having. We wanted teachers to be extremely research oriented, and it did not take long for teachers to begin to ask, what is the evidence? Here is this practice that I'm pushing forward, but where is the evidence? So that's when we talked about more evidence-based education.
Thank you, Avis. It's so important and really at the core of everything we're doing at the moment. Also really important for us to think about in terms of your action number 17. Now, I know it's about Indigenous concerns, but I wonder what your advice for school and system leaders would be on extending cultural awareness and putting some of the intentionality around that cultural awareness and diversity in schools.
That's right. And you know, when I mention that, Annette, I am always afraid to talk about cultural awareness because the last thing I want is for people to begin to propagate stereotypes. Yeah. Many years ago, when I was in Ontario, of course, people knew I was from the Caribbean, and everybody wanted, Avis, come and tell us about the West Indian child. And I thought, oh my goodness, there is no such creature as the West Indian child. And as educators, we must get to the point where we begin to see the common needs of young people. Yes, there may be some aspects of culture that we need to understand, like their religious beliefs and so on. But as a rule, when we get to the stage where we're treating young people as human beings with basic human needs, and all they want is caring and empathy and so on, that's the level at which we want to get people. Yes, know the cultures and know the beliefs. That can be taught to you by people who are steeped in the culture. But I don't think we should spend an inordinate amount of time on that because I'm afraid of things disintegrating into stereotypes about young people. And they cannot be stereotyped. They're all unique individuals. And it's up to us as adults to have the people skills so that they trust us, so that the relationships are authentic, as we heard from Robert, and so that we can do the work we've all been trained to do. But bringing out the humanity and the aspirations and the aptitudes and abilities of the children, regardless of what they look like or regardless of all their backgrounds. Mind you, when we deal with children who have been in refugee camps, there are certain sensitivities that must be there. But that's what a good teacher does. I've seen so many of those teachers who they know the backgrounds of these children. They know the trauma that they have experienced. They've dealt with Indigenous children, but they are so people-oriented and caring that it doesn't take much. It doesn't take time for the students to realize I can trust this person. This person understands me. So let's go beyond the cultural awareness to the common humanity that we all search for and seek.
I absolutely agree. I think that was wonderful. Thank you for that.
I just saw a quick question here. Does Avis have any concerns about challenging the status quo and what that means? Don't I have, when I was a teacher, I know organizations well, and I know people who challenge organizations very often. They are not received. Sometimes they can be ostracized if you have a vindictive and mean-spirited leader at the top. I used to welcome challenge, as I said before, and ask people to challenge my thinking because I was not arrogant enough. Some young teachers knew more than I knew on certain topics. So if you're dealing with organizations, there's a book written many years ago by Peter Block. It's called The Empowered Manager. And I learned a lesson from that book. He says we must know the difference between caution and courage. But later on in the book, he says we must know the difference between courage and suicide. So there are two sides to that coin. You know when what you're doing can be suicidal, and ask yourself, do I want to die on that mountain? And everybody must make that decision. For me, it was equity that I decided I would die on that mountain. If I saw, or just how people are treated. As a young Black woman who understands what prejudice is, how some people are treated. I mean, I am on Air Canada and I see an old woman being treated poorly. I'm going to step in and say, you cannot treat that woman that way. So the one fight, I used to take on many fights as a young person, but I decided, no, I will only deal with one. When people are being treated poorly, when people are being demoralized, that's the one fight I would take on. So don't take on too many fights. You can't deal with it. You will burn out. Make sure you have allies with you, but also know the difference between courage and suicide. And only take risks that you know you can deal with those consequences of.
Thank you,
Thank you
Avis.
so
That
much.
just reminds me of a quote from Margaret Wheatley, I think it was, about taking a stand and stand there. And so know what you stand for, and actually that's where you are, and you know that's your base and where you work from. I'm very conscious of time, and I can't see any other questions in the chat, so I was just going to come in and to say a massive thank you for this afternoon, for all the time you've taken to prepare for this afternoon, for sending through such a massive amount of information that will be of great use, I'm sure, to everybody in the call, and I'm sure people will share that with colleagues across the system as well who weren't able to come this afternoon. So just a very huge thank you. You've shared with us so many fantastic examples from such a broad range in your career, Avis, and we're very, very appreciative of that. And I think just some of the aspects you've talked through in terms of, moving from equality to justice and the importance of that, looking at the importance of relationships and those lessons learned and how we actually then take forward that action. And I think most importantly for colleagues this afternoon, potentially talking about leading from the heart, with emotion, with empathy, so that people feel that love and caring from you. And I think actually we've seen that radiated so well this afternoon from your engagement and the preparation, the care you've taken to prepare for this afternoon. So just thank you so much for all that you've done today, but also all that you've done across your career and the way you've supported Scotland, and particularly just have to thank you for that from everybody on the call. So thank you, and I hope you've enjoyed this afternoon, everyone.
I have, and before you go, let me just ask you kindly to look at those personal introspection and reflection, lessons learned. I hope you will read either of those, because I gave you on a personal level what are some of the lessons I have learned. But I would like to end with just one quick verse of my favorite poem. It's by Joseph Mensch, and it says, "And so they come to us. And so they come to us." Just one verse. "And so they come to us, the speeding summer gone, with faces mirroring the past. Some show remembrance of last June, and some of yesterday or of this morning. For no child comes to school alone. They come with hopes and fears and dreams. They come with memory of home, the mother's kiss and father's fond embrace, of grim reality of emptiness. Some mothers have no time to wave goodbye. A father has no face who is not known, who never was or who will never be." And it goes on, and so they come to us. Thank you very much for making students the center of the school system. And I want to congratulate you on what you have already achieved in Scotland. It has been a pleasure for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Avis. We've had a wonderful session with you. Everybody's been inspired by listening to this conversation. So thank you once again. It's been a privilege.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the term and have a blooming good rest over the summer, and get some fresh air and exercise, and look after yourself well. And we'll see you again in the autumn. Bye-bye.